So hello everyone, we are delighted to see you again this evening and to welcome you to the first workshop in 1994. Our meetup for today is Introduction to Reproducible Publication with Quarto, and this workshop will be hosted by Torin White, lead data scientist in the research IT group at the University of Illinois, Chicago in the United States. Next, please, Mona.
Yes.
So we are happy to collaborate with Our Ladies Room to organize this meetup. And I will start by introducing Our Ladies Paris. So we are a local chapter of the global open source community Our Ladies Global. So Our Ladies Paris was founded in 1916. Our goals are to provide a supportive and encouraging network for Air users and to promote learning and collaboration in the Air community. So we can see that Our Ladies Paris serves as a vibrant community for Air practitioners based in Paris. And you can follow us on our social networks if you haven't already done. We are very active on Meetup, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Mastodon. So feel free to scan these QR codes, please. And I'll now let Federica introduce us early this room and our guest speaker, Torin White.
Hello, everyone. My name is Federica Gazzelloni. I'm the lead organizer of Our Ladies Rome. Our Ladies Rome is one more local chapter of Our Ladies Global. It's been founded in 2022 by Claudia Vitolo, and then assigned to me, and we are 3 organizers, and we expect more. So basically, we are completely dedicated to promoting gender diversity in the R programming language community, and we host monthly meetings to provide a platform to discuss current trends and hot topic in the R language. So we encourage active participation and engagement. We welcome your suggestions and comments and invite you to get in touch with us. Here are our main social networks, so you can scan the code and get in touch with us. Today we welcome Dr. Torin White. Is our invited trainer, lead data scientist in the research IT group at the University of Illinois in Chicago, in the United States. Their background is in information science and science communication, emphasizing the open science movement. So passionate about teaching researchers about software engineering and code data management skills to improve their research producibility. They collaborate with the University of Santa Barbara and help develop carpentry-style workshops. We now over to you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, last thing before starting, please. So as I already let you know, like you are recording the session today. If you prefer not to be recorded, please don't hesitate to turn off your video. And if you have any comment or questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the chat box. And yeah, later we'll have a form to fill out. Just when you will leave Zoom, it will pop up. Don't hesitate to give us your feedbacks. It will help us to improve the quality of the workshops you organize. And Our Ladies chapters also are dedicated to providing a respectful community for everyone. So you have a code of conduct. So please, let's make sure to have a welcoming and friendly community for everyone. Thank you all for your attention, and the screen is yours.
So cool to see how many people from around the world have joined. I know we have a chapter of Our Ladies in Chicago that's been on break for some time, and we're hoping to revive that. Some of the people on my team ourselves, so maybe we'll have some presenters from Our Ladies Rome and Paris come and join us at some point. But again, I'm going to talk about do an introduction to Quarto today, and this is going to be as hands-on as possible as we can with approximately an hour and 15 minutes. It looks like people have been sharing the GitHub link in the chat that we'll be using for examples today. Thank you very much. And I'll just copy and paste that again here. So you can go ahead and download that folder, and those are the materials that we'll be working with today if you would like to follow along. And I will show you that again in a second here. So they mentioned that I am from the University of Illinois in Chicago. So I'm joining you from my office in Chicago here today. And the temperature just increased from a -1 degrees Fahrenheit to 1 degree Fahrenheit. So that's about -17 Celsius here. And we've been dealing with that all weekend. So we're looking forward to some warmer weather later this week. And like I said, I'm at the University of Illinois, Chicago, not to be confused with the University of Chicago. University of Illinois, Chicago is the public university that's located in Chicago. So, and I work on the research IT team here as the lead data scientist, and our team manages the research infrastructure like the high performance computing clusters, the secure computing environments, and the research data storage for the whole university here. So that's just a little bit of background on me. I think as they also said, this is a workshop. I'll be presenting a part of the workshop that I and colleagues from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I previously worked, developed. We started during COVID working on this. And the first iteration was with our Markdown. And then when Quarto came out, we jumped on it and converted our whole workshop to Quarto. So looking forward to talking to you about this relatively new tool available in RStudio today. So I had the fun fact about the temperature in Chicago. The other fun fact that I like to talk about with our workshops on R is that one of the, I would say he's not the creator of the ggplot package, but one of the people that inspired the ggplot package actually was a professor at the University of Chicago, Illinois, which I didn't know until I started here after some time. But unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago. But his name is Leland Wilkinson, and you might be familiar with it. But he wrote the Grammar of Graphics, which is the theory or the philosophy under which the ggplot package was written. So I like to share that fun fact. I'll throw his Wikipedia in the chat. I have to confess that I have not read his book yet, and I very much need to. But I find him very inspiring. So let me get started here. I know I was invited to give a presentation on our Markdown, but since Quarto has kind of come and is the next generation of our Markdown, I'm going to talk about Quarto today, and I'm going to make sure to talk about and briefly mention some of the differences of our Markdown and Quarto in the presentation to give people some context. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started here. All right. And again, this will be hands-on. So if you do have questions, it is being recorded, the presentation. So please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. I might also have a colleague or two from the University of Santa Barbara here who can answer some of the questions as well. Or as I saw, there are some people who have some experience with Quarto. So if you know some of the answers to people's questions, please feel free and answer too. We only have a short amount of time, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get to everything. But I want to make sure that people can follow along here as we're going. Can you see my RStudio console? at this point? Okay, wonderful. So when I was thinking about Quarto and R Markdown and how they're related, I was realizing it can get really confusing when you're working in RStudio these days, because when you go to make a new document, there are just so many options. So I was doing a little bit of investigating and to see if, just because I don't know, I'm not familiar with all of these. I've worked with Quarto and R Markdown extensively. I'm familiar with, but I have not done a lot of work with Shiny web apps. But we have all these other types of documents. So I was digging around a little bit. So to give some history here, Quarto document, as we know, is more or less the next generation of R Markdown. I'm going to give you some examples of the improvements on Quarto over R Markdown in a second here. We also see there's Quarto presentation. I haven't messed around with this too much, but that is also one of the new document options in RStudio, which is, I believe, just a type of Quarto document. We also see under R Markdown, there's this R Notebook option. And this is more or less, again, I haven't used this much because I have used R Markdown extensively, but it's more or less a type of R Markdown document which behaves more like a notebook, especially if you're familiar with Python notebooks. So it's got more of a Python notebook feel to it. And that came around after R Markdown. We come down here, we see there's the Shiny apps, and I actually didn't look up when those became available in RStudio. We have a lot of file options for different programming languages. So as we know, Posit has changed their name from RStudio, and part of this is becoming more widely available and making the RStudio interface more widely available to users of different programming languages. So they have these options for different types of languages now in RStudio. And we also have some documents here, our Sweave, our HTML, our document. So when I was digging around, I found out that our Sweave is actually like an early generation of R Markdown, and that the idea of Quarto documents, R Markdown documents, R Sweave is to be able to combine code and text together in one document. And R Sweave allowed people to do that by using LaTeX formatting with R code to make a document. Now, some people live and breathe LaTeX, but not everyone does, and it can be confusing. So they recognize that, and the next generation was R Markdown, which uses Markdown styling, which is easy to do styling for documents to combine code and R Markdown for text. And when I was digging around, I couldn't find the date that R Sweave was introduced into the RStudio platform, but R Markdown, the first release, was somewhere in 2014. So it's been around a while, just to put that in context. And then Quarto, the first release, was in early 2021. So this is really new. And then it was in development until summer of 2022, somewhere around then, when it was officially announced and integrated into the RStudio platform. So I've been working with Quarto documents since the early days. I think we started working with them in the summer of 2021. So it's still under development. A lot of the features were there. There were still a lot of bugs, but it has come a long way since then. So some of the benefits of Quarto documents versus our Markdown documents. The big one is its flexibility with other programming languages and platforms. So with this push to make RStudio more available to users of other programming languages, Quarto documents, you can now more easily use other languages such as Python, SQL, C++, some of the other examples down here in the documents. Not only that, but it is compatible with other platforms like Visual Studio, like Python notebooks. You can even use it on command line if you'd like. So it's usable outside of RStudio as well, which means if you have teams that are multilingual, say some people use R, some people use Python, it's more easy for those people to work together in Quarto documents. In fact, oh, you know what? Now that I'm host, I have control of the waiting room. So there's a bunch of people waiting to get in. I'm going to let them in quick.
Maybe you can deactivate like the option of having a waiting room you see in the settings. I don't know.
Oh, yes, I will do that. So then everyone can just join automatically here. Let me find the menu though. Okay, so the waiting room is turned off now. Everyone should be able to join directly. Okay. So that is some context for the development of Quarto. And I'm going to show some examples of R Markdown versus Quarto. They're very similar. In many ways, Quarto works exactly the same as R Markdown. In other ways, there have been some major improvements with the usability in Quarto and some differences in syntax. So let's see here. Was there anything else I wanted to mention before we started? No, I think that's good. I want to move on to the workshop portion so we have a good amount of time to get an introduction to Quarto. All right, so I sent that link again for the example, and I'm just going to put it in the chat again in case we had anyone join late. This was sent out in the setup instructions as optional, but if you do follow the link to this project, I'm going to bring it up on my page here. As part of this workshop that we created, which is actually a 6-hour workshop, it covers not only Quarto documents and projects, but reproducibility and using RStudio to its max in general. So it covers project management, data and code management. It covers versioning with GitHub in RStudio. It covers using virtual environments in RStudio as well. I am going to focus on the Quarto part today because we only have an hour and a half. But please, if you're interested in the future, you can explore this workshop and work on some of the examples yourself. It looks like sounds like the recording got stopped here. Not sure why. Let me restart it. Okay, we should be good to go. So we found an actual project paper, that they had really fantastic examples. They documented their whole project on OSF, the Open Science Framework, with all of their code and everything. The only thing they didn't do was use R Markdown or Quarto to write their paper. So we took the code from that project and we used it to convert their paper into an R Markdown and Quarto example, so that we can use like an actual, paper for working with Quarto instead of some dummy paper. And then we also don't have to worry about writing a bunch of text together and wasting time or writing code during the workshop here. So I'm going to put in the chat, this is the main workshop that we're working from. This is currently in the UCSB Carpentry GitHub, but it will be soon integrated into the Software Carpentries Incubator curriculum soon. So you'll find it there in the next couple of weeks because we just finished another push of work on it. So I'm going to bring up the project that we took this example from. I just lost the link. So here's the OSF page. So just to give some context here, this paper the title is The Influence of Acute and Chronic Stress on Choice Consistency. And essentially what this project's team did was they tested how stress affected choice of food that people chose. So if they were offered a snack when they were hungry, when they were stressed, did they choose something sugary or did they choose something healthy? So some pretty cool research. And yes, this workshop is free. All of the software carpentry incubator lessons are free, and you can navigate to them anytime and work through them on your own or join some of the live workshops online. All right, so this is the example that we're working with here. So I gave you the project example, so you can go ahead and download this. You can clone it via Git, or you can just simply download the zip file to your computer. And I am going to open that. Actually, I'm going to show you a bit in the RStudio navigation before we actually open that project and work with it. So I have RStudio open now. To start a Quarto document, again, we can simply click Quarto document, start a new document. It's going to bring up a little wizard to give it a title. I'm just going to leave it as untitled QMD. I'm not going to do much with this, so if you don't want to follow this, I just want to show you what it looks like to start a Quarto document here. So you have 3 different default format types for Quarto documents, and that's once you finalize the code and the text, then you render that, and we'll talk more about this, either to HTML, to PDF, or Word. Now, there's a ton more formats than that, but these are the default available here. So the other part here to look at is we have 2 choices of engines, Knitr and Jupyter. Knitr is the default engine for RStudio, for our code, and Jupyter is for Python. So we're going to keep the default and work with Knitr today, and then just go ahead and create this document. So this is just some default text here in this document, and I'll walk through it here in a second. But I'm also going to open up a R Markdown document just to show the comparison here between the 2. So I'm going to open an empty R Markdown document. So we see here, they look pretty similar. Now, the 2 example, like the default texts are slightly different on the 2. But what we have here is at the top, there's kind of this box area with 3 dashes to start, 3 dashes to end. And this is the YAML header. And this defines some of the metadata and the settings for this document. Both R Markdown and Quarto documents have these options. Now, the difference with R Markdown and Quarto documents from regular R scripts is that they are text first instead of code first. So in R scripts, we're mainly writing R code. And if we need to add any comments, we have to use special syntax to indicate that this is a comment. It isn't something that should be run as code, and using the pound sign or the hashtag sign, however you want to describe that. Instead of being code first, like R scripts, R Markdown and Quarto documents are text first. So when you're writing text, you don't have to have anything, any specific syntax to indicate that this is text. It expects by default what you're writing in this document is text, Markdown formatted text specifically. And instead, when you want to write code, then you'll see instead that there's some special syntax here for code. So this is the Quarto document here. You'll see there's this gray box where we have code, or in this case, just some simple math. And we have this curly brackets with R inside, and that indicates the language that this code should be executed in. So this is just 1 + 1. We also have 2 × 2 × 2. We also have some other syntax here that I will explain more later. And if we look over at the R Markdown document, this looks pretty similar. We have gray boxes. This is the R code that we're running. So R, and then summary. So we have a data set called cars, and we're just are making a summary of that data set here. So it looks very similar. Now, there are some slight syntax differences that you might have noticed. And I'm not going to talk about those right now, but I'll touch on them a bit later. So the main differences between R Markdown and Quarto, as you're working on them within RStudio, is that the syntax for running code does look different. When it comes to writing the text with Markdown styling, pretty much exactly the same. All right, so I'm going to close both of those. And we're going to open this project now. So if you've now downloaded and unzipped that file, you can go ahead. I'm going to open the main. And now this is, okay, well, my sound just did something weird, but I think I'm still here. Please let me know if you can't hear me. So this is our project. We have it set up with a .rproj file. And what that does is it helps bundle the files together for this project. So we have a number of different directories here for code, for data, for output, for reports. And we also have some other files as part of this project. So I can simply double click this rproj file, and it will open it up in RStudio. Now, this won't make much of a difference here because I already have it open. So more or less, you're going to say the same thing, but that's okay. And with that, opening that R project file on the side here in the file navigator, we'll see that we are directly in the root folder of this project in the navigation. So just again, this is a project that already existed. We have code written, we have the data here, and we actually have an Quarto document that's been started with text so that you don't have to write it. So to give you a bit of a navigation here, we have code. So that includes a data preprocessing script, an R script, and 2 scripts that will produce plots that we'll use in the report that we're writing. And then if I go back to the root folder, we have data. We have 2 raw data sets. There's some simulation data in here, and I'm not sure what GARP stands for, but this is the main data set that we'll be working with here. Additionally, just to keep things organized, we have a separate output folder for the scripts that generate plots. Those plots get saved in this output folder, and any other plots or figures or images we can save in this output folder as well. And finally, we also have a report folder, and this is where I'm keeping the Quarto file for this project. So it gets its own folder for its work. Now, this, of course, is quite a long name, so this is cut off a bit. But there's this paper-looking symbol, and then the 4 kind of quadrants that you see in RStudio. This is the Quarto document. We also have the HTML output. So we've started work on this document and have kind of a preliminary HTML output there. But I am going to work with, and I invite you all to open this file as well, the Quarto document. If I hover, I'll see that it actually has a .qmd ending. So that's the page that I want to, or the file that I want to be working with. So we open this here, and we've got the text all set up. Again, this is a very abbreviated part of the paper that was the original paper that was published to make it simpler for this workshop. But we have the abstract, we have a data description, some description of the analysis, experimental design, etc. And then we're going to be adding this preview of research results section here as part of this example. So you can see here, all of this is white. So the majority of this paper is text with that markdown styling. Now, there are 2 options for editing this paper in RStudio. Similar to if you're editing an HTML page, you can see the nice visual editor where you have options like a word processor would, where you can bold, italics, put in different headings, things like that. But you also have the option up in kind of the top left corner of the menu to switch to source mode. So you'll see this is slightly different. It doesn't look as clean. But just like if you were to switch to source mode on a web page, you'd be editing the HTML directly. And here we'd be editing the markdown text directly. So this is some of the markdown syntax here, and here, and we'd be adding the code and the syntax directly here as well. However, for this workshop, we're gonna go ahead and work in the visual mode because it's a lot cleaner and easier to work with. All right, let me check there. Looks like we're pretty good on questions. So let's get into doing some edits here. Make sure I'm on the right part of my notes. Didn't miss anything. Okay. I do just want to bring up this image really quickly from the curriculum. And this is also found in the Quarto documentation here. But this is the process of working with a Quarto document. First thing, you open a new file type or an existing file type with the QMD extension. You write Quarto using the syntax. So write our text with the markdown formatting. You embed our code. So we take those gray sections and we add what are called code chunks and add our code into the document. We render that, so it will run the R code and take its output and then combine it with that text for the final slideshow output, the PDF, the HTML, the Word file, etc. So again, that can be found in the Quarto documentation as well, which I'll try to remember to link at the end of the presentation. Up in this YAML file here is where you can add the title, the author. We'll have a bibliography. I'll talk about that at the end if we have time, and the format. One cool thing I just wanted to mention is, again, we have these default formats, HTML, Word, PDF, but there is a wide range of formats available. And I was just reading, I think this is a newer one, but there's a format called GFM, which stands for GitHub Flavored Markdown, which allows us to write things like README files or pages that we want to put up as a GitHub pages, maybe a website or something. We can write that in RStudio here. We can render it. And now here's some nuance is that RStudio uses Pandoc flavored Markdown. So Markdown is a styling option, but there are slightly different flavors depending in the environment that you're working with. But RStudio uses Pandoc flavored Markdown, whereas GitHub uses GitHub flavored Markdown. So they have some slight syntax changes and differences in GitHub that they use for their Markdown styling. So I can use a QMD document to render this from the RStudio style of Markdown to the GitHub style of Markdown, and then push this document, say it's a README file, to GitHub directly, and voila, I have my README there. So that's pretty exciting. At least I find it exciting. So anyway, moving on, I just want to spend a few minutes on the editor because I think we're all used to editors, word processing editors and their options at this point, and this follows the same thing more or less. But we have some examples in here just to go over quickly. So the first one here, we see example 1 here. And that's because we left out some things, we left some errors in this paper for us to complete. This data in brief for proper formatting for this citation really should be italicized. So when we're in visual mode, we can simply use the menu option, highlight the text, and then click on the italics button and put it into italics right away. One of the nice things, if you're someone who likes editing things on the source mode, is that you can also do that in the visual mode. So I know that italics are a single asterisk in the beginning and the end of the text that I want to italicize. And if I do that, it will automatically take that formatting and output the format that you want to see here. So it gives a an automatic preview of what you should see that styling to be, which is great. So you can do it either way in the visual mode here. All right, so that was example number 1. This example number 2, again, pretty simple, but I want to actually have this link a live hyperlink. So all I can do is just click on that, and then there's a hyperlink option in the menu here. And it already knows this is the link to the URL, this is the text, and I can hit OK, and automatically I have the hyperlink there. So fantastic, that's pretty straightforward. Now let's see, what else do I want to show here? We can also add tables. This was something that used to be a bit of a pain in R Markdown. So I think someone just asked a question about the key features over R Markdown. Adding tables in R Markdown used to be a bit of a pain, and they've since improved it in R Markdown as well. But in Quarto, it's super easy. There's this table option here, and then insert table. It used to be that you had to use the Markdown formatting to add tables, and it was just rather tedious. So again, I can just, as you know, Microsoft Word or any other editor, choose rows and columns here. And I'm going to take that, or go back here. I'm going to undo that because I don't really want that in my paper, actually. Undo rather than redo. One thing that's a little bit misleading here is, to me, this looks like it's the undo button, but this is a go back to a previous source location. So it's not the same as undo. There's a shortcut for undo, Control Z or Command Z, but there isn't an easy option in the editor here. Just an FYI. The question is, what are the key features to use it over R Markdown? The simple answer to this is that it is flexible. So you can use different languages more easily. You can use it across different platforms. I very often use it in Jupyter notebooks as well. You can write a Jupyter notebook, use Quarto to output a nice HTML or PDF file directly from that. Or you can write QMD documents in the Jupyter notebooks infrastructure as well. Same with Visual Studio Code. You can also do it via command line. So one, the flexibility. And then two, they note this in the documentation for Quarto, but because Quarto is a next generation of R Markdown, most of the development effort is now going towards Quarto. So a lot of the new nice features will be found in Quarto. Some of those will end up in R Markdown as well, but not all of them. So eventually R Markdown will be phased out. And I would say for now, that's the main benefit. Some of the things that you could do in R Markdown, like using the package bookdown, those are integrated automatically into the Quarto platform. So that's another benefit there. Eventually, the gap between R Markdown and Quarto is going to be increasing because most of the new features will end up in Quarto, but may not end up in R Markdown. And like I said, with tables and also with citations that I'll get to later, the improvement of the usability of those features in RStudio has improved like tenfold in the last year, even. It used to be that some things were just a real pain to do in R Markdown, and a lot of the features have been very much improved in Quarto. And some of them may have been added into R Markdown as well, but not all of them. So working with the editor here, inserting tables. Again, this is pretty straightforward of any word processor. The point where it becomes different is that there are some code-oriented differences in the RStudio, and most of those you're going to find under the insert option here. So we can add images. There's this hyperlink here, the picture of the landscape. But in RStudio here, we also can insert LaTeX, inline and display. You also see options here for citations, and I'll show that at the end of the presentation, for code blocks, for the YAML blocks, if you started with a blank QMD, you can just automatically add that YAML block in, for example, and for executable cells as well. All right, so for example here, if we want to add a formula, and this is, if I search, I'm just going to go to Control F or Command F. I'm going to search for example 6, just to navigate more easily. I can easily make this into LaTeX, for example, by inserting math either inline, so if I want it to be within the sentence, or if I want it to be as its own standalone formula with this here. If you're already familiar with this syntax, you may not need that option, but it does have the options to add those directly here within RStudio as well. So I could just also type this, and I have that formatting here. And I have the preview that comes up automatically. So if I made any kind of error writing that formula, I can see it right away and make the changes. All right, so other editing features. There's some other interesting things, but I really want to skip right away to the code because the text is much more straightforward and intuitive, I think, for everyone who's familiar with word processors. All right, so working with code in Quarto documents. As I mentioned, the way to visually tell the difference between the text and the code is what the background color is. So with all the text, it's always going to be white. And then with code chunks, as they call them, it's going to be gray. So to add a code chunk here, there are a couple different options. We have example 8 and 9 here, which is where we're going to add these figures generated from code in our Quarto document. I'm just going to give myself some space here. And you can add a code chunk with this +C button. There's also an option in the insert menu. There's also a keyboard shortcut, which I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Let's see, keyboard shortcut. Someone else might be able to put in there. I'm not gonna waste some time right now. Control-Shift-I, yep, to try to find that. So this is our code chunk. Again, what distinguishes it is this gray background. We have this curly bracket, R, and then curly bracket here. If I go to source mode, that's going to be a little more visually interesting. We'll see that a code chunk is defined by these 3 backticks, and then that curly brackets with the R there. And then an ending 3 brackets is important. That denotes the end of the code chunk. But I'm going to go back to the visual mode here, and let's add some code. So from here, again, we have the code already prepared for us. So I'm going to navigate back up to the root folder here and then go to the code folder. And the first figure I'm going to put in actually is this heart rate analysis. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy most of this. We don't need this ggSave and saving this output as a PDF. So I'm going to leave that out for the time being, and I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it here. So I'm loading tidyverse and Bayes factor, reading the data, doing some conversions, dropping missing values, running the analysis, and then creating a plot for this, all within this Quarto document right here. So now that I've added this code, and of course it would have taken me a lot longer to write it from scratch, I can now run this code. So I didn't show this earlier, but when we output our document, and I'm actually going to create just a new blank Quarto document to show this first. When we render, we render a document to get to the final output, say a HTML or PDF. So I use this render button up here. Again, this is just the default file. But when I hit render, it's going to run. First, I need to save it. It's going to run in the console here, or the background jobs, I should say. And then we actually see in the viewer on the right-hand side the preview of it, or the output. So here, this is an untitled document, format HTML, and this is pretty generic here, but you can actually see what this is going to look like once the code and the text have been combined. Now, when we add code, we actually, before we just render it and then hope that the code works, we have a preliminary step that we can take of running the code first, which is really helpful for any debugging. So there's this kind of play button here in the top right-hand corner of the code chunk, or there's options within the menu to run the current code chunk. For example, there's also keyboard shortcuts. So I can go ahead and run this. And I know ahead of time that this is not going to work, that there's an error. And so I see once this is run, we get the error output here, and it says that this data file doesn't exist. So I'm going to come back up here, and this is the issue here. It's highlighted in red, which is really nice for picking that out. And I already know that this is a relative path error. And now this is, this might confuse people if you're just encountering Quarto for the first time or don't do much in RStudio. But this is a weird nuance with both Quarto documents and R Markdown documents. When you have a project, an R project, it's set up so that the working directory is this root folder here, Quarto project example main. And that kind of alleviates some of the headache of relative paths when you're working with things that are in different directories. So say you have code here and you have data here, it alleviates some of that stress. Now, by default, our Markdown documents and Quarto documents do not default to the working directory being the root directory, as with R scripts, which is the normal behavior when you have an R project. So the error that I'm getting is because it's taking the working directory as where this report is. So in the report folder, we have the Quarto document, and it's looking within here for a data folder with this pre-processed data here, which of course doesn't exist. So to fix this, I need to fix the relative path and do .. / data so that it goes back up a directory level or down, however you picture that, and then finds the data directory here. So I could rerun this now, and this should run great. And once it loads, I'll have the preview of once it loads. Usually it doesn't take this long. There we go. So now I have the preview of the plot that I created right here. Fantastic. This looks good. From here, I could go ahead and render my Quarto document file, and I'll have a nice formatted HTML page with both the text and this plot right there, at least ideally. But there are some adjustments that we're going to have to make before we get a nice output here. So like I said, the Quarto and our Markdown documents have a slightly different behavior here when it comes to what it takes as the working directory. Now, I could go ahead and I could just change the relative path each time I'm copying code from somewhere else. But instead, I could say if I'm going to be putting 4 figures in here, I can make an adjustment to change where the working directory is for this file. Now, most of the changes that we make for the settings are done in this YAML portion here at the top of the file. This is one quirk of Quarto, and where I feel like it is less straightforward than our Markdown is how do you set that working directory file? In our Markdown, there's a menu option that lets you do it right there in RStudio. However, there is not that option for Quarto, at least to my knowledge. Who knows, maybe they've changed it, but I don't think there is. No. So the only way that I can change this, for some reason I can't change it in YAML, but what I change it in is another file that's called the _quarto.yaml. This is kind of brings up another topic for Quarto documents where I have this R project right here. I'm writing one report right now, but say I'm writing a book and I have like many different documents for each chapter that I'm writing. So I'm going to have many different Quarto documents. Instead of editing the settings in each Quarto document, I do also have the option to do that globally for the whole project. And this is done by editing this Quarto YAML file. You'll see in the documentation, they make references to our projects and Quarto projects, which is confusing. It's like there's two different types of projects. But more or less, our projects are our projects. You can use them with R Markdown. You can use them with any other type of file in RStudio. The only difference for a Quarto project is that it's an R project, first of all, that includes this _quarto.yaml file here. That's what makes it a Quarto project. So when you go, I actually need to go to the file menu, which you can't see because it's on another window. But if I go up to RStudio and then choose file and then new project, it'll start a new R project, but there's no option for starting a new Quarto project. And again, that's because it's just this file that defines a Quarto project. So I'm going to open this _quarto.yaml. And this is where I'll be able to change the settings to change the working directory. And I'm mentioning this because one, it's something that if you didn't know this nuance, it can really trip you up and take a while to figure out why are my R scripts running fine, but my Quarto document isn't, and it's giving me all these path errors. And two, it really is a time saver when you're working with projects here. So in the project, I can add another option to the YAML file called execute-dir. When I start typing this, it's going to suggest that this is the option that I'm coming up with or would like, which is great. I can hit enter, autocomplete, and then we see these two options here. So the default is file, so that'd be the Quarto document file, and the other option is project. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it to project, and I'm going to save this, and then I might as well close it right away. But again, opening this back up again, under the project, this is a project setting. It's indented just as the title is. I can add this execute-dir and then choose the project option here. Now, if I come back to my paper here and I scroll back down to my code, anytime, I'm going to make sure this is changed back. I don't need the .. It's just in data processed, pre-processed. And now if I run this, it's going to run just fine. It takes the working directory to be the root folder of this project, and I can run my code. And any other code that I add from this code folder will work just fine as well. Let me check. Okay. We seem to not have any questions in the comments. Again, if you do have questions, please add them. I might skip over them for now or get back to them later if possible. So we've added our first code chunk here. We've ran the code and we've debugged the relative path issue, changed some of the settings in the project to make my life a little easier, our lives a little easier going forward working on this. And now from here, I want to render this document. So I'm going to hit render up at the top. And now it's going to run this code. And it's going to take the output of that code, that plot, combine it with the text into a markdown document, and then finally output this HTML file for me. So here we've got the whole article here. And if I scroll down, I should see my nice plot. Okay, so if I scroll down, I can see my nice plot. So here's my plot right now. Now, if you noticed, while I was scrolling down, I scrolled down through a lot of other stuff here. And this does not look nice, and I don't want this in my final report. But it's echoing out into this document all of the code I ran, some information about loading these tidyverse packages and the Bayes factor package, reading the data, again, all of the code here, any kind of warnings are outputting into my HTML file. And I don't want that. To make you know, a nice scholarly publication that I'm going to submit to a paper, that's no good. Or even if I'm writing a white paper, I don't really want that there. So this is where we get into code chunk options. And this is one of the main differences that you're going to see when you're working with, when you're switching from R Markdown documents to Quarto documents, is the code chunk options. Now I'm going to show you how to do it in Quarto, and then I'm going to show you in R Markdown what that looks like. So to add an option here, let me get ahead in my notes. 1 second. So in Quarto, our options are added after the first line here with the curly brackets and the R symbol. So we're going to add our options, and the syntax is going to be a # or hashtag, and then a pipe, which is shift and then the button above your enter key. And then you're going to write the option name with a colon and then the option text. And this text will not have any spaces there. And there will be, for most options, there'll be predefined options. So I'm going to, that's just a fake one. So I'm going to add one of the first options I'm going to use here to get rid of all of this. I don't know, it's not crap. I'm going to say get rid of this crap in my paper here. The first one is echo. So echo, again, it's going to auto finish that. And then I have 3 different options. I'm going to change it to false. And what this is going to do is it's going to not echo back the code that I ran into the paper here. So I'm going to go ahead and render that again. This might take a second, but we'll see we've eliminated the code from the paper. Okay, so someone said that this commenting should work fine in RMD files. So this might be something that they've put in RMD so that it works between Quarto and RMD. And I am pretty certain on this, but I think that a lot of the R Markdown syntax, from what I remember experimenting with this when it first came out, a lot of the R Markdown syntax also works in Quarto. So it could be that you could take your R Markdown file and more or less put it into a Quarto document and run it, and it'll run just fine. You might have a few little issues here and there that you need to change with Quarto, but a lot of things are compatible between R Markdown and Quarto. Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. So echo equals false. Now this finally finished running. And we see here, none of the code was echoed back. Now I still have a lot of other things that are showing up, like the loading text for the packages, and also some warnings and the Bayes factor analysis. So from here, I can add a couple other options. Yes, how to apply the code options to all chunks and not only the current one. If I get a chance to show you this, I will. But the short answer is these options will go in the YAML at the beginning of the document. So I'm going to finish showing what other options we can use here. And if I get a chance, I'll show that here, the global options, they call them. So we have message, and we're going to do false for this one as well. And I'm going to go ahead and keep moving along and just add these other ones instead of rendering and kind of showing what will be eliminated to save some time. We're also going to choose an option for warning. We're going to set this to false. And then if we use one final option here with results and set that to false. Oh yeah, thank you. Someone's got the option for adding this to the YAML in the comments. So if you want to go ahead, skip ahead, add these options to work globally for the whole document, you can follow those right there. So message means that any of the messages, like with loading the packages, attaching core, tidyverse packages, etc., those will be left out of the document. Echo is getting displayed in light blue. I am not sure why that is. It might have to do with the version of RStudio you're working with, but I'm not sure exactly. But as long as you click render and they work for you, then you should be fine. And then warning here, when we see, it'll get rid of all these warnings for the different packages, and results. Mostly that's with this Bayes factor analysis. It will leave out these results right here. So I could re-render this and we'll see that all of this goes away and I have a nice clean paper now. Yeah, I'm not sure, Ellen, why that is happening, but again, Quarto is an active development. It is stable, but it is an active development still because it's relatively young. So that's why I suggested updating to the latest version of RStudio, because there are still changes with how Quarto works month to month. Great, I'm glad it works still. Okay, so someone asked how I moved the HR analysis.r code to the code chunk. I simply, and this is again, not great for reproducibility, but if I have time, I can show you a better way to do this. Otherwise, you can look back in the workshop later. But there is an option to run your code from a script elsewhere in your project and just have some code here that runs that directly. And that means that you don't have to copy and paste a lot of this code. But for this first example, I just copy and pasted this code from the code folder here, and then HR analysis, copied it all, stuck it in there. Again, not the best for reproducibility. One of the purposes for using a QMD document is that when there are changes to the data or changes to the code, that happens in one spot, and then this QMD document gets updated accordingly. By copying and pasting that, I kind of break that. Now I have to edit it in this code folder, and then I also have to edit it in my QMD document. But there is an example in this workshop, this longer workshop, that shows you how to execute it directly from that R script and in here. So it's really nice. Again, if I have a time, then I will show you that as well. So I've added these in. Let's go back to the viewer. This finished running. And now we see that we just have the plot and that's it. Perfect. A few other options. There are tons of options. There are probably 100, I want to say, maybe more. I can't remember the exact number now, but there are so many different options for you to configure what gets output from this code that's run, to configure how it looks. So aligning figures, resizing figures, things like that. There are so many different options. I'm only going to show a couple more here to introduce them. Oops. But these are also useful to add to your code chunks to keep things working well, and for some other features like cross-referencing later on. So the first option I'm going to add is label. And this is just a short descriptive label. So I'm going to call it Fig1 here. I think in the paper it says it's Fig2, but it's actually Fig1, at least as the way I'm working with it today. So I'm going to give it a label, call it Fig1. And the important thing with adding labels is that there are no spaces. And also it often doesn't play nice with dots, so periods. So I don't want to do figure dot one, and it doesn't always play nice with underscores. So you want to use dashes. So this is going to give a label to this specific figure that I can reference other points in my document and link to it, which is great. The other thing I'm going to add is Fig. Let's see if it autofills. This is actually one that changed recently. So it used to be that you used fig.cap, and this now has changed to fig-cap. And here I can give a caption for this figure here. This should be within quotations. So I'm just going to call it Fig, well, we'll change it to Fig 1. Just going to copy and paste this for now. Fig 1 dash heart rate analysis. So now when I re-render this, it's going to have a slight change where it'll give me that caption there, but the label won't show. It's kind of like the alt text in an image in an HTML file. So I'm going to, oh, I have to leave that. I can take out this example 8. I'm just going to get rid of this now. So I can go ahead and render. All right. All right, so we'll keep moving along here. After that renders. Oh, my caption didn't work. Strange. Let's try this again. Not fig.cap. Fig-cap. Well, this was working for me earlier, and I'm not sure what's going on now, but it will add a caption underneath your image right there, your plot. So if anyone sees what the error is, quickly, please comment in the chat. So those are the options I'm going to add for now. These first 4 are more or less to do with how that code outputs. And then these have to do with how the plot displays and also labels. So again, usually, oh, there we go. So fig-cap. Let's just copy this down here. It's exactly the same. And then if you type in fig, it might be that the line break shouldn't be there. And I just kept that there so you could distinguish between those 2 types of options there. So now that it's gone, then it looks like it's working just fine. I think that you're right, that was the issue. So if I type in fig here, you can see all sorts of different options for how the fig will display. You can define a width, a height, alignment, a link, etc. The alt text for it as well. But you can go ahead and explore those later on. Okay, we only have 15 minutes here, which means we're going to be running out of time, which is usually how it goes. So the final thing I want to show with code here is that, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the global options, but someone put that in the chat, so go ahead and explore that on your own. But the final thing that I wanted to show was we just added a code chunk, as they call it in our Markdown and Quarto. And actually, before I get to the next thing, one thing I wanted to mention. So we have these menu options for adding code chunks as well. Something that's really confusing, I think they added more recently, is this code block option. A code block is not the same as a code chunk. So if I choose code block, it'll ask me for the language I want, and I hit R. You'll see here, it's not grayed out. The background isn't gray, but I can put code there. And if I do copy and paste some of my code there, what this will do is it'll display it as our code with all of the proper highlighting, but it won't run it if it's in a code block. So don't mix up code blocks and code chunks. Just an FYI. So Control Z, we'll get rid of that. Now, the other thing I can do with code is I can add inline code. So I'm going to go to example 7, 7A actually. And we have a paragraph here. Yes, so yeah, with fig-cap, it numbers the figures automatically. And you'll see that if I have a chance to show you the cross-referencing example. So this text here, though, we just say the CSV file contains choice consistency data for n number of simulated participants. Again, as far as reproducibility goes, I can actually run code inline here to calculate this number directly from my data rather than calculating it and then manually typing it in here. And actually just a fun, interesting fact, the first version of this workshop we didn't actually use this data example. We used a reproducibility paper on they had some stats on how many, papers were reproducible in this cohort of papers that they picked. And we didn't originally have access to the original data, but we thought, oh, this is perfect. We're teaching a reproducibility workshop. We want to use something about reproducibility. And then we said, it would be so much easier if we had access to the raw data. And when we did get access to the raw data, we found that the paper had no reproducibility almost. It was just the worst data management ever. I'm not going to say what paper this was, but and the author was really apologetic, but they didn't have the raw data available anymore to provide us for the workshop. So the funny thing is that when you use the inline code example, when you use their text, which had maybe 92 participants or something like that, I'm just making that up. When you actually calculated that from the data that they provided, which again wasn't the raw data, but the process data they provided, it was actually off by 1. So it was really interesting to see that, we can calculate this directly. Instead, we eliminate some of those calculation errors. So we're now using this paper, and this paper is wonderful. They did a wonderful job of project management here. But I'm going to add some inline code now. We've got where's the example? I'm just going to copy and paste this into the chat for everyone. I'm going to copy and paste it myself so I don't make any errors. So this is the syntax for inline code. So I'm going to click this right here. And you'll notice here, the syntax for a code chunk is 3 backticks. For inline code, it's only 1 backtick here. So now I've got this R and row, so it'll count the number of rows in the simulation data file. And I will try to render that. I already know that this is not going to work. I get an error there, and that's because I didn't actually load the data. So this is where we can talk about a little better practice for organizing the code and the packages in our QMD file. This goes for RMD as well. But at the beginning of the document, it's a really good practice to add a code chunk up here. And actually, you notice it switched into source when it ran into that error. So I'm going to go back to visual. I'm going to add a code chunk at the beginning, and I'm going to load the data file here. And I'm going to make sure this actually can just be data/raw because I changed the working directory. Yeah, so for an example, if you just want to see this work, you can use one of the RStudio default data sets, Iris, and just see how that runs. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to load the data at the beginning. And then if I go down to my previous code chunk, I can actually take the data loading here and actually the packages as well. And I'm just going to cut those out, and I'm going to put those at the beginning. Loading data once and your packages once at the beginning will help the rendering speed quite a bit for your paper. You do need to make sure that you load these packages within the Quarto document, but you don't need to run them every chunk. So once you load tidyverse, you load base factor, they'll be available for the length of the whole document. Same with the data. So now I should be able to run this. And I can look at my environment, verify I've got the Bronner simulation data, and I've got this DF for the processed data. From there, if I now render this and I go back and look at that section where I added the inline code, it will have calculated that. And it'll need a second here to keep running. But I'm actually going to stop this, and then you'll just have to trust me. Again, if you want to just test this with a default data set, that's even easier. And I want to spend a couple minutes here before we end on bibliography and citation options. Now, like I said, you can run code from an external script in a code chunk. If you look at the repository, the full lesson, it's under the advanced code chunk options episode. So that's where you can find that information there. There's also a section there about, the best practice for loading data and packages that I just demonstrated. So now for bibliography, citations, and cross-referencing. In RStudio, and I didn't mention this, if we go back to our files and we're going to go to the report, you see here we have a references.bib file. So this is a bib text file that already has all of our bibliography formatted, at least the initial bibliography that we need right there. So I can open that up and I can see this all here. I can actually look these references up through RStudio as well and automatically format them in this bibtext file as well. So here, I don't have to know, this formatting necessarily. I can add that all as I am working. And you might have noticed, but I kind of brushed over it, that we have this bibliography option in the YAML that references the references.bib. What this does is at the bottom of the document here, it adds a references section. Now, I don't see anything now in my editing file, but if I did look at my rendered paper, which I stopped, so it's not showing that, I can open the HTML file. Just open this in the editor. No, we don't want to open it in the editor. I'll show the HTML. I'll just open it in the web browser quick and show you. So once I render this, all of the references will be added at the bottom there. And there are different YAML options for how these appear, what style of citation you use, etc. And that all can be edited within the YAML as well. Now for adding citations, what did I just do with my notes? There they are. I do have an easy option within the editor. I'm just going to throw this somewhere and go back to visual mode. Under preview, I'm just going to add a citation here. So we do have an option to insert citations, cross-references, and footnotes. And this is something there's been a major improvement on in Quarto, and there probably have been some improvements that have been added to our Markdown for this as well. But doing bibliographies just used to be a pain a couple years ago. And now all of this is easily accessible within the menu option here. So I can add a citation, and the easiest way, or at least the easiest way I feel to do this, is to find the DOI of what I need to cite. I have a dummy one here. So I'll put this in the chat so everyone can follow along. Here's a DOI that you can work with. I can paste this in, search it. And again, it might not bring up every paper, but it is good about bringing up most of them. So if I need to add this citation, I can go ahead, it'll add it to the references.bib, and I can insert it into my paper. So this will be the syntax for citations. And again, you can do that manually as well, but it's super easy to use this insert citation option. What else should I mention here? So I can also change the citation styles. You'll notice here I have another file in this report folder called apa.csl. So this is for APA citation style. If you need a different citation style, I think the Quarto document shows for the nature citation style. You can find that, download it from their website, add it to your project, and then if you go at the top to the YAML, you can actually define this as the citation style you want to use. So you use CSL, and then I can reference that apa.csl, and it'll automatically reconfigure everything. Oh, good. I'm glad I convinced you. I do love working in the source editor, but the visual editor has had huge improvements in the last years. So here, now if I render this, I will get my citations in APA style. I don't remember off the top of my head what the default for for Quarto documents are. My colleague is more the expert on citations. The other thing that you might want to do, and this used to be almost impossible several years ago in R Markdown, if you want to have something in your references that you don't directly cite within your paper, then you can actually add that into your YAML as well. This isn't the most elegant of options, but what I can do here, so this, I just put it in the chat, but in the YAML, I can use this no cite option. So again, you don't do it within the citation insertion menu, the wizard, but there's this no cite option, and then you can add whatever you need to cite, but not reference directly. So if I want to cite all the packages I use, I can do that here and then not have to reference them in the paper. Otherwise, the references that show up at the bottom are the ones that you directly reference in the paper. So that's kind of a little nuance there. So now I should be able to render that and get that answer. But we are 2 minutes from the end. And I don't know that we have a lot of time for questions, but I hope that was really useful for everyone. And I'll leave you again with the links. And then I want to give you the link. I mean, the Quarto documentation is really easy to find if you search for it. It's just quarto.org. But Quarto has a lot of options and examples here as well. But I do encourage you, there are some additional examples in the workshop that we created, especially for some advanced options for code chunks. And I'm hoping to add some more as well. But in that document, on that site, here you go. I can copy and paste correctly. So this is the full workshop. And just again, here is the project that we use for today. So go ahead, use this example. I mean, the authors, we asked for authors' permission to use this as an example. They were delighted. So you can go ahead, work with this, test out different options with Quarto with this project example provided here. So I hope that was useful for everyone as an introduction. I know there are some questions I missed along the way, and I apologize if I missed them. But thank you very much. And I'll hand back the host now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Torin. That was really amazing. Yeah,
Yes. Very interesting.
yeah. You have people like thanking
Good, I'm
you
glad.
in the chat. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of work to switch over to using R Markdown or Quarto, but I think it's really useful and worth it. I mean, I use it both in RStudio and in Jupyter Notebooks because now I'm more, I need to use Python more these days, unfortunately, but you can use it in either. And I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time figuring out now how to switch host. It's not giving me that.
It's okay. It's
option.
fine.
Okay.
But yeah, it's okay.
There we go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you again, Torin, for your time and your contribution to our RLDs communities. So we'll make sure to share the recording video later on our YouTube channel, RLDs Paris and RLDs Rome YouTube channels. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add something, Federica, please. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, hi. I'd like to say thank you to Torin for this wonderful presentation, and thank you to Our Lady's Paris for this joint event, which has been amazing. So I look forward to more events like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, so have a nice evening for everyone, or morning or day for others.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you. See you.
Thank you, Torin, Federica.